So let's begin to add macro elements into the new section and systems that we've developed. And so we are on the administrative side. This can also be performed on the user side as well, but we're on the administrative side. So we're going to select tools, templates, and clinical note contents. And so we're going to go right into the default note and make those changes. And then those changes will be reflective in the other notes that have that section in it, which, as we previously talked about, our office visit note is one of those notes. And so we're going to select default and click modify. And then that brings us into the default note and, of course, our sections. And so we're going to select Scott section. And you can see identified within Scott's section, we have 5 systems: Jennifer, Ashley, Heather, Michelle, and Amy. And in order to build macro elements for these systems, then we will come down to this little gearbox here. That is the personalization icon, and we'll click on that. And that brings us into the screen, or the back room, if you will, to build out the macro elements. So macro element personalization consists of completing the following formats. And you'll see at the top here, we have caption with the red asterisk. Well, this happens to be the title of the macro as it's stored in the library. And this title, that is the caption, can be searched as well. And so it dumps into the EHR library of macro elements, all within your reach right here in this search area. And the field label is actually that label that will be shown in the EHR for the user. So you may call a macro element one thing because you have a limited number of characters for a title, but you may describe it different in the field label for the provider, so that provider understands what that macro is for. Next, you'll see we have patient text. Now, what goes into this box is what you would want the patient to read if this section was marked to be able to be visible in the patient portal. And so if this is a visible section in the patient portal and you want this particular system shown in the patient portal, then you can put text into this box that would describe what it is that you want the patient to do, or it could even be a question. And we typically use this patient text area when we've completed like outcome assessment tools or other types of scoring forms or information that we want to gain from the patient, and then it can dump right into the record itself. Next, we also have the option to code this particular macro. And so when you click on that down button, you'll see that there are a number of codes that can tie to this macro, and in particular, a CPT code can be tied to this macro. And in order to select the CPT code that you want, you would just go ahead and search for that code, and we'll unclick favorite, and that'll drop all the codes. And let's say that we're going to search 97140. There it is, manual therapy, and we want this code tied to the macro. We would go ahead and select that. So anytime this particular macro is selected, then this code will drop into the charge capture area, and it can be extracted into charge capture to be billed from charge capture. And so we're going to go ahead and not assign a code to this particular macro, but that's there if we need to. So we've talked about the caption, which is the title within the library. We talked about the field label, which is what the provider will see and hopefully recognize to know what this macro is about. And likewise, the patient text, what we want reflected through the portal regarding this particular macro that they may be completing. And then we come down to various macro element formats. We have a text format, we have a list format, option number, date, time, Boolean, sequential, and input. So let's talk about the text format first. So the text format is whatever you put into this box. When it's selected as a macro, it will print whatever is in the box. And so let's say that we're going to do a text format, and we're going to say Jennifer is Scott's firstborn child, period. And you'll see that when we typed in that text, you'll see how it began to type into the field label those first characters, as well as in the caption. And as I mentioned, there's a limited number of characters for the caption, and we typically recommend that you name the caption so it's easily recognizable in your search for it in the library. And likewise, the field label, as I mentioned before, should be recognizable to the provider as knowing what is in that particular format. So we did this. We've got a text. We've got a text macro. We're going to go ahead and click OK. And now it's going to be within that system, Jennifer system. Okay. Next thing we want to do is let's do another macro. And so this time, though, we're going to create a list macro. Now you see on the left-hand side a space and on the right-hand side a space. You can think of these as bookends and think of this as a bookend macro. Now, a number of these are bookend macros. Matter of fact, the next 5 are bookend macros. And so what do we mean by that? Well, we're going to go ahead and create a macro here. We're going to type text in the front. And we're going to say Jennifer and Trevor's children are. And then on the bookend, we're going to put a period, and then I'm going to hit enter so that I separate this macro from my next macro option that I'm going to have underneath this system. And so Jennifer and Trevor's children are. And so we're going to go ahead and copy this because it doesn't automate it into the field label. And we're good. We're not going to tie it to any code. We've got our list. And that will create now this macro. It's a bookend macro. And one of the things that you'll learn about the list, differentiating factor here, is that this list will add commas and an and to create a sentence. And so that's why you would use a list. So let's go ahead and click OK. Now, we're going to go ahead and build into this macro. And so we have that selected, and we're going to select new. First one we're going to put in there is Jake. Then we're going to add Heidi. And then finally, we're going to add Macy. All right, so we have 3 options there. Now, let's take a look at how this looks when we make those selections on the user side. So I'm clicking Done, and we're going to select Jennifer. Jennifer is Scott's firstborn. That's the macro. Notice how it just lays that out. All right. So that was our first text macro that we did. Next, we did a list macro, Jennifer and Trevor's children. Okay. And it'll reflect what that is. We're going to say is Jake, Heidi, and Macy. And notice how it lays out all 3 of those names, and it gave a comma after Jake. If it was just Jake and Heidi, then it's Jake and Heidi. If it was just Jake, it's only going to reflect Jake. So whenever you have options that could be combinations within the same sentence, then you'll be selecting the macro element list format. So let's go in the back room again, because there's other macro elements. So we're going to click on New, and now let's select Option. So Option is another bookend macro element, and let's go ahead and create an option. So Jennifer's favorite food. So we've created that, we've labeled it, we've titled it, and we're going to click OK. Now we're going to go ahead and create some macro elements for selections within that particular macro. So we've got pasta. We've got hot food. And we've got cold food. And let's say that we want to add a free text box within this selection. And so what we would do to add a free text box, since there are many within the system, we're going to go ahead and search for one. So just type in free text, hit return, or click that little green arrow. And you can see we have a lot of free text options. And so we're going to go ahead and use this one. And we're going to put it inside of this Jennifer's favorite macro, favorite food macro, as an option. And so we'll see how that plays out in just a minute. So keep in mind that what we did was we have this macro set up as an option macro element. All right. So the thing about this is that it is exactly that. It only gives you one selection. You may have a number of options to select, but you only get to choose one. And if you think about it, what we're stating here is Jennifer's favorite food. So it's one food. It's one and that's it. Okay, what is her absolute favorite? That's what we're asking. So any question that you have or any particular item that you're covering, if there is only one selection that should be allowed, then you want to use the macro option. So clinically, reflexes, 0 to 4, or any other type of scaling that you're doing, create it as an option macro. And so we're going to go ahead and click done. And so there we go. We have Jennifer's favorite food, and we're going to click pasta. Oh, nope. I think her favorite food is hot food, or maybe it's cold food. But you can see it only allows me to select one. So that's the option macro element. So let's go back and let's take a look at another macro element, and that would be number. So let's select number. This is where if you want to put a number on something, then this is what you would build a macro around. And again, you see this is a bookend macro element. We have a beginning, we have an end, we can put text. And so let's go ahead and put Jennifer has children. And what we may want to put here in the field would be number of children. And we could certainly use that as a caption title as well. So what we're asking here within this under the Jennifer system and this macro element is we're going to state how many children does Jennifer have. All right. And so we're going to go ahead and click OK. And that's an option there for us. And we're going to click done. And so we get to this question, if you will, number of children. It will pop up a number pad for us to be able to click on how many children Jennifer has. And we click OK, and there it is. So let's go back and find another macro. Date. As we talk about the date, again, bookend elements here, macro element. And this will pop up a calendar, and you can set a default date as today's date or whatever date. Time, same thing. And you can set up the current time that we're at as a default time. Boolean. So what this does is it allows you to have a question and then have a yes/no answer to it. And then you can set that yes or no as the default to save you a click. So let's look at how we would do that. So Jennifer's favorite day is Saturday. And actually, let's pose that as a question. And we'll try to shorten that up a little bit. And we'll create that. We're going to hit a return to always remember spacing in your note. And we'll go ahead and click OK. So let's go on the user side and see what that looks like. And there we have Jennifer's favorite day is Saturday. That's our question, yes or no. And we just click yes, and that answers a question. So this works really well, as you can imagine, by having macros or systems show up in the patient portal where you're asking them questions. And then this is typically where that's used. Now, as I mentioned, you can set a default for that question, which we didn't. But if we did, then it would automatically, pop up as a yes. And then we would simply select return. See how it already selects yes? And we would just click OK. So it saves you a click if you know pretty much what the answer is going to be most of the time. So let's explore a couple of the other macro sets. Let's click on new. We've talked about now text, list, option, number, date, time, Boolean. Now sequential. Sequential is very much like list, with the exception that it does not add any type of commas or and does not create a sentence per se when you have a number of options. However, a good way to use sequential if you are wanting to list it out as a list, and so it's not going to be a sentence, but rather it's going to be a list that will fall underneath this, formatted that way in the note. So let's just go ahead and name this one. And let's put some options in there to be able to select. And let's say that we want to put in a text box because there may be something that we haven't thought about or that we want to make sure that we add. Oops. Free text. So that's the thing, you have to make sure that you type in the exact letters of that caption in order for it to pop up. So once we have these set up, one thing I'm going to add to these macros, and if we think about this from a list perspective on how we want them to show up in the note, we will go ahead and hit return or enter so that we create a space between this and the next macro. And so as you work with the macro elements and you test them in your note, you will be able to see how you need to change your formatting based on layout and how you can do that, just by putting spaces here or there within the note. And so by hitting a return, creating a space there, this is where it will begin and lay out a list right below that. So let's take a look at how that is visible in the note. All right, admirable qualities, great mom. See how it lays it right there. Great wife, cares about people. So if you want this type of a format in the note, that's how you can do it with the sequential macro element. And then finally, as an option, We also have what's called input. Now, this is a text box. And so you can create text boxes with a caption, and let's say Trevor's favorite foods. And that's going to be a free text box. We're going to click OK. And then you'll see right here, it's a free text box. So let's see what it looks like on the user side. All right. Trevor's favorite foods. All right. He likes hot and cold food, just like his father-in-law. And there we go. And that will just put in what it is that you type in that text box. So those are the macro element formats, and to be able to personalize in a number of ways how you want your note to lay out. So hopefully this has been helpful for you to help begin the process of refining and developing your note system within this EHR system.